So Sony just released the A7RV this week. This is one of the most anticipated cameras of 2022, and it has a lot of the greatest features and high-tech capabilities of any mirrorless camera that Sony's released to date. And there's quite a few features on here that seem pretty cool. I figured I'd just share some information about it, and yeah, these are just my thoughts, and I'm sure there's plenty of other videos that you could be watching, but since you clicked on mine, I figured I'd just run through it. It looks like a phenomenal camera. Again, I won't be purchasing one anytime soon. I'm shooting with the A7S3, and it's perfectly fine for what I'm using it for. I'm an enthusiast, and I like just keeping up with the latest gear. So anyway, without any wasted time, let's just talk about some of the highlighted features. It does have the 61 megapixel sensor from the A7R4, but there's some really cool features that I don't think a lot of people were anticipating. The one feature that I think a lot of videographers are gonna like, and photographers too, is that 4-axis hinge screen that is included on the back of the camera. So that's pretty cool. I know a lot of people were anticipating just a regular flip out screen because the R series never really had a flip out screen before. So from them to jump from the A7 IV that just had that hinge, now they have both the hinge and the flip out screen in one, which is actually the best of both worlds because you have that stability, and I would imagine that it's pretty robust in comparison to even the flip screen on the A7S3 and the A7 IV. But yeah, that's a really cool feature, and I'm really excited to at some point test it out in the future. And I'm sure it'll make its way to the A7 V and whatever the future is with the FX3, and if the A7S IV comes out in the future as well, which is a pretty cool feature to have. The other thing too is that it has 8 stops, 5-axis image stabilization, which sounds like it's going to be pretty helpful, especially with those high megapixel images, because from what I understand, when you're shooting that high of a resolution and the sensor is moving around in the body, any sort of stability really helps because you want to make sure that there isn't any degradation in the quality of that image. Again, that's on the photo side of things. On the video side of things, I think it's a little too early to tell how beneficial this will be, but I'm sure it's going to be quite a bit better than just the standard 5-axis image stabilization that's in the other Sony cameras. Now, that I don't believe is talking about the active stabilization that's in the Sony cameras. That's probably, I believe that's included in this camera as well. I think that it's still way better than what we have currently, so no complaints there. I know a lot of people are talking about the AI autofocus too, which I think will be pretty spectacular, and it appears that it tracks planes, trains, insects, cars, just a whole bunch of different things. And it has this deep learning capability, and the processor, I think, is what is assisting it overall. And again, I'm not an expert in terms of how this all works, but I think it will be pretty awesome to use out in the field, and for any enthusiast or pro photographers that really need that snappy autofocus and shoot a lot of different content, maybe even photojournalists too. I don't know if they would be using such a high megapixel camera, but I think that feature is pretty astounding actually overall. So yeah, and then in terms of some of the video specs too, 8K 24 frames per second. Now it sounds like it's going to be cropped in at about 1.24, I believe that's what it is. And I can pull up the specs here. It doesn't really specify in the internal recording modes what the crop is. It does say that you can shoot Super 35 in 4K, but here I'm seeing UHD 8K at 23.98 frames per second. I have seen on some of the videos that there is a crop in 8K. So, in comparison to the Sony Alpha A1, that does not have a crop. At least I don't think it does. But honestly, I don't see that the majority of people are going to be using the 8K feature. I think most people are really excited for the fact that it can shoot 4K 60 in 10-bit in that full frame, using the full width of the sensor like the A7S3 does. Now, it can't shoot 4K 120 in full frame. I think they've intentionally reserved that to kind of keep the A7S3 in its own realm in its own space. It was pretty intentional of Sony to do that. Now it does, like I said, it does shoot 4K in Super 35 mode, and from my understanding, it is oversampled as well. Where the 4K in full frame is not oversampled from the 8K sensor. So in comparison to the Canon R5, that is a little, not quite as nice of a feature. I mean, it's great that it has the 4K full frame, but from what it sounds like, the oversampled 4K is not going to be a feature in the A7RV. But again, I could be wrong about that. That's just what I've seen and what I've heard. Other features that I think are pretty relevant too. This is the first Sony A7R series camera that can actually scale the image size, so you can shoot, I believe it's around a 26 megapixel photo using the full width of the sensor. So you're not stuck or capped at that 61 megapixel image. You can select the resolution you want. And it has all the new features that are pretty much expected in terms of the menu that the A7S III, the Sony A7 IV, and I believe the A1 all have, and also the FX30. What else does it have? It also has the dual CF Express Type A card slots, which I don't believe the A7R IV had, so that helps with a lot of the speed and being able to work better with the buffer overall, if I'm not mistaken. But yes, quite an amazing camera. I will say it does also have and I'm just looking here, the viewfinder. It does have the same viewfinder resolution as the Sony A7S III, which the Sony A7S III, what I'm shooting on right now, has one of the best viewfinders all around. I think it's probably the highest resolution viewfinder of any camera that Sony has. And I think any manufacturer has for a mirrorless camera. And the phase detection, it has a 693 phase detect autofocus points, which is pretty sweet. I don't think that's increased much from the last R series camera, but I think it's really mostly the AI, that deep learning autofocus. But again, I think what I had mentioned before, between the 4-axis screen, the 10-bit 4K video recording modes, those are a pretty substantial feature as well, especially if you're going to be shooting with other Sony cameras that also have 10-bit. Now you can all shoot them in S-Log3, grade them, and the color will be pretty spot on. I believe the color science is definitely taken quite a leap in terms of the previous generations of Sony cameras. And so you're going to have a really complete package with the Sony ecosystem with this camera. This is probably the ultimate hybrid camera. I will say we don't know too much about any overheating issues yet. As far as I know, I don't think anybody's really mentioned them in any of the videos, any of the YouTube content creators that are testing the camera out and have had the camera for a little while. I haven't seen anything about overheating issues. I know that the A7 IV had a couple of, I think there were a number of units that had overheating issues, but so far I don't know of any reports of the R5 having any. I would imagine that there's probably a cap on that 8K recording mode, just because 8K I would think would definitely heat up that body, even though that the body is the same chassis as the A7S III. I do think that, like I said, it's a pretty amazing camera. It's really cool to see the technology that Sony is packing into these new Sony mirrorless cameras. Now, obviously, this is a close to a $4,000 camera. Yeah, it's $3,898 right now at the time of this release. For the majority of people that are looking to buy a camera, this is probably not what I would recommend. And again, who am I to recommend at the end of the day? But it's really cool to see where the technology is going overall. I think that for high-end professional photographers and videographers too, this is a pretty killer camera. You know, it's exciting for me too, because, you know, maybe in a year or two, maybe I'll pick one up. I definitely splurged on the A7S III, and it's a phenomenal camera. But at the end of the day, all these cameras, they don't retain their value for very long. In fact, I'm sure this camera is probably a fraction of what it was worth just 2 years ago. So keep that in mind when looking at all of these specs and the excitement around these cameras. There's a lot of people that get really excited about these cameras, but of course, you know, there's plenty of other things you could spend your money on. Audio, lighting behind me as well, just as an example. Those things are going to definitely take your work to a much better place than just buying a brand new camera. And I'm guilty of it too. I love looking at new tech. I love talking about new tech. So that's why I'm creating this video. And let's see, anything else that we can talk about? Just looking at the still image capture section on the B&H website, it says you can capture in 3x2, both JPEG and RAW, 60 megapixels, 26 megapixels, 15 megapixels. 4x3, you could do 54 megapixels, 23 megapixels, and then 13 megapixels. 16x9, JPEG and RAW, that's 51 megapixels, 22 megapixels, and 13 megapixels. Then 1x1, 40 megapixels, 17 megapixels, 10 megapixels. It does appear that you can shoot RAW, 16-bit RAW over HDMI with the A7RV. It's only UHD 4K, at least from what B&H says. So for any videographers out there, and I know this is a pretty niche market, it does come with Cinetone, which I think everybody expected too. And for things that I was kind of expecting would be in this camera that didn't quite make it. Now, I am pretty impressed overall with the direction they went with the 4-axis hinge screen, and I think that should be in every Sony camera moving forward, like I said before. But I kind of was expecting that the resolution of the screen would be a little bit higher than what they went with. It appears that it's just over 2 million dots. Now, I know this is just really nitpicky stuff, but in my mind, I know Sony manufactures displays. I know they can do better than this. And I think most people were kind of expecting a higher resolution screen. I would have expected closer to maybe 2.5, 3 million. And I hope it's definitely bright enough too. That's one area that Sony is lacking in comparison to Canon, and I think even Nikon. I haven't used a Panasonic camera before. I think I've picked up a GH5 once at a Best Buy, but from what I can tell, other manufacturers, their screens are quite a bit further advanced in technology. But it's funny because Sony's the one that makes screens. I guess that's just what they're going with. It's a little nitpicky, but at the end of the day, you know, we're paying a lot of money for these cameras. I think that's pretty much it. I know I didn't really go too much into detail with the speed of the camera. From what I understand, it's quite a bit faster than the A7R4. Yeah, so anyway, these were just my thoughts about the Sony A7RV. I think it's a hybrid shooter's dream camera for the most part. Again, we're in a very privileged time in terms of all the advancements in technology, but it's pretty cool to see what I will be able to, you know, get in the future. These things depreciate pretty fast. I know I have a pretty high-end camera and I get really excited about them. We have so many different options at so many different price points that it's pretty cool. Thanks for checking out this video. I mean, if you really liked what you saw, feel free to leave a comment, and yeah, I'm sure I'll be putting up more content in the near future as well. That's pretty much it.